Future Warrior, The Mars Campaign. Chapter 6. The sun was rising behind Stalker, a beautiful Martian sunrise over an ugly man-made scene. Had that much time passed? It seemed like only an hour or so to Stalker since they had deployed, the time passing fast during the night's furious fighting. D had returned from a quick meeting with the neighboring unit commanders, and it had been decided to continue where possible with the advance and to keep probing the enemy defenses. There has to be a lot of confusion at the enemy CP. They won't know what or who they've run into. We need to keep the initiative. Stalker thought it over for a moment. I agree, D. Let's round up what ammo we can and keep the pressure on. The first problem was everyone in the unit was virtually out of ammunition, and D set the unit to scavenging what was possible from the remaining IFVs and the bodies of the fallen. Once collected, the ammunition was distributed, one magazine to the unit medic and to the wounded who would stay behind, the rest being divvied out to a patched-up D, Stalker, and the other two battle-scarred operators still fit for combat. Stalker found his rifle under an enemy body and was able to kit himself out with one grenade and 3 rifle magazines. He also found an extra clip for his Z8A pistol and a few frag grenades. Not bad at all. Stalker also slung a captured enemy IW-30 with a full magazine and another 2 stored on the rifle's stock-mounted magazine holders, just in case his impulse rifle ran dry. Stalker, take point, Stalker acknowledged, and using the bunker he had destroyed earlier with the red missile as cover moved up the slope, keeping his eye on the fallen bodies around him for any signs of movement, but finding none. Stalker reached the bunker and, using his rifle's cam, peered around the corner. There were several sandbag and plascrete emplacements, as well as a low pushed-up berm of red sand, but there was no sign of enemy personnel or vehicles, with everywhere showing signs of intense artillery strikes. Using some of the craters as cover, Stalker moved up to the berm and, crawling to the top, peered over it. There were more trenches, this time with the occasional red figure moving along them. But it was clear they were access rather than defensive trenches, probably used for observation and troop movements. Artillery roared overhead. It was close. Up ahead, the slope flattened out, and the echoing sound of firing artillery could be heard. Stalker waved a limping D and the other up to the berm. We've got access trenches to our front. There's artillery, perhaps a click or 2 up ahead somewhere. The cheeky bastards have brought it close to the front to reach our rear areas. If we slip into the access trenches, we might be able to make it close enough to ID their positions. All right, keep on point and go silent. I'm on a D. Stalker handed his rifle to another operator and drew his close combat weapons, the spikes automatically deploying and keeping low, crawled over the berm and into the closest trench. Stalker doubted anyone would have seen anything as the sun was rising on the horizon behind him, and without the advanced optical aids of an EEA helmet, which the Red Infantry didn't appear to have, the glare would be reduced visibility substantially. Stalker hit the soft sand at the bottom of the trench and crouched. No one was in sight, and after waiting for the others, he moved ahead, listening and looking for any sign of the enemy. Stalker moved down the trench, his pistol leading the way, carefully looking for booby traps or warning devices while keeping low to stay beneath the height of the lip of the trench. Stalker continued, moving forward for quite a distance before a concerning sound could be heard coming from a trench intersecting his, the sound of voices. Using a wireless camera mounted on the front, his pistol, exactly the same miniature type as the one on his rifle, Stalker peered around the intersection in the trench and saw that it wasn't another trench at all. The trench only stretched a short way before opening up into a wider area. Scattered around the open space were boxes of supplies, a fold-out field table, and 3 seated soldiers engaged in conversation. As he peered around a little further, Stalker saw a 4th soldier standing in a corner, looking out over the battlefield with a pair of binoculars, an officer, he noted. All of the men were dressed in standard UEDF issue SBA, which had been painted a dirty red color, and all were wearing face masks against the dust. Around the sitting soldiers in various positions were 3 IW-30s, the officer having his slung over his shoulder. But what interested Stalker the most was the pile of papers he could see on the desk, the small stack weighted down by a couple of red rocks. Stalker listened for a moment. The enemy soldiers were grumbling amongst themselves. Still no word from the attack? Not unless you want to go out there and shut down the UDF jammers. We should have heard something by now. It is awful quiet out there. Shut up. They're probably still chasing those cowards down the slope. I don't know. Exactly, you don't know. So shut up and let me enjoy my siesta. Stalker had heard enough and moved in. With 3 carefully aimed shots, he dropped the 3 lounging soldiers and then, with a double tap to the chest, dropped the stunned enemy officer. The Red Legion officer never had time to think, shock registering on his face as he slid to the ground in a heap. Stalker turned his attention back to the soldiers. 2 were dead, both hit in the head. The third had a sucking chest wound and was trying desperately to reach one of the nearby rifles. Stalker kicked the weapon away. The man glared at him. "You're all going to die here. You're not worthy." "Perhaps, but not before you." And with that, Stalker calmly shot him in the face, then wiped his splattered pistol on the dead man's armor. Stalker signaled the others to move up, forward area clear, and turned to examine the papers on the table. They proved to be maps of the frontline areas showing trench patterns and unit locations. According to the maps, they had been attacked earlier by the 32nd Martian Assault Infantry. D and the others arrived. Stalker handed the maps over and, after grabbing his rifle back, turned to examining the enemy equipment. All was standard UEDF issue, and Stalker stocked up on a few grenades before disabling the rifles. D, meanwhile, had put in a call on the TACnet about the maps, passing on the valuable intel. "Okay, I've talked to TACCOM. We're further forward than any other unit. TACCOM has rerouted some other units to our location. Once they get here, we will be going after that artillery." As he waited for the reinforcements to arrive, Stalker turned his thoughts to what had happened so far. It was obvious that the units which attacked them had not been the best forces the Reds had to offer. The men they had killed looked very green to Stalker's experienced eyes. At least some of the veteran formations of the Martian Corps must have gone over to the Reds, but the enemy he had so far encountered certainly wasn't them. By the way they talked and the lax security on a forward CP, they had to be new recruits, not veteran soldiers. That left a worrying problem. If these mainly infantry formations were all newly formed, where were the heavier trained divisions hiding? Soon 3 units of battered-looking Terra Nova soldiers arrived cautiously at their position. The mixed men from 5 units that taken part in repelling the counterattack earlier that morning. After consulting with them, D signaled the advance, and they fell into a staggered, single-file column down the trench towards where the maps indicated the artillery was located. Not that they needed the maps, as the guns were clearly audible in distance. As the artillery position grew closer, the ground began to shake, and at an intersection in the trenches, Stalker raised his hand, and everyone stopped. Stalker could now see an enemy firebase. Deployed inside were 6 self-propelled 203mm tracked Centaur heavy guns. The large tank-like artillery were positioned in dugouts. Surrounding them were a number of sandbagged infantry emplacements. It was obvious to Stalker that this was a temporary position. The Centaurs were equipped with front-mounted dozer blades, which they used to dig themselves gun pits, while earthen walls thrown up around the pits helped to protect the Centaurs from air and artillery fire. It was this and the sandbag, as opposed to plascrete, emplacements which gave away that this was a new position. Obviously, UEDF counter-artillery fire had forced the Reds to keep their guns moving. In the positions surrounding the Centaur self-propelled artillery, SBAs, Stalker could see a number of heavy machine guns, around 50 to 60 infantry, and he paused as he heard a new noise, the sound of tracks. Stalker looked towards the source of the sound. Coming from around a dune to the rear of the artillery was something very different. It looked like a tank, but closer inspection revealed it was something else. It had 2 multi-barrel cannons and a large turret flanked by 2 box-shaped missile cells, which was topped by a rotating search radar. It was a modular air defense vehicle, or MADV, a self-propelled anti-aircraft tank that could be fitted with a blistering array of different weapons, this particular one being equipped for low-level air defense. The MAD's dual-purpose rapid-fire cannons could also, with equal ease, be turned against ground targets. Just like us, Stalker realized. It was a high-priority target. Its SM-8 standard missiles were also dual-purpose, being able to engage and destroy air and ground targets with equal ease out to a range of several kilometers. About 6 centaurs, 1 MADV, and infantry 50-plus change, all received. Hold position. A moment later, D's voice came back in Stalker's helmet. The heat's coming, 60 seconds, everyone laser target. Stalker, you take the MADV. Stalker activated his impulse rifle's side-mounted laser designator and put the beam, which although it was invisible to the naked eye was clear as day to Stalker thanks to his EEA helmet, dead center on the MAD's turret. The other assault troops targeted the centaurs and the infantry emplacements. Inside the MAD's climate-controlled turret vehicle, Commander Francis de Lorne heard a beeping coming from his control console. A light was flashing, and on the top of his tac screen was a flashing icon that read, "Loss." He immediately checked his threat display. It was clear. That doesn't make any sense. He was still baffled when a moment later a laser-guided artillery shell fired from 26 kilometers away, punched through the thin top armor of his vehicle and exploded, sending the turret flying 50 feet in the air. Less than a second later, other shells began to fall. All 6 centaurs exploded in spectacular fashion. Other shells landed around, and on the infantry positions, creating chaos. The effect was total and devastating. Even before the last rounds fell, the assault troops were up and moving, Stalker charging with the others into a little dust-filled piece of hell. The ground was littered with body parts, and fires raged as ready-to-use ammunition and fuel stores exploded. As he ran, Stalker cut down anything that moved, shooting more on reflex than anything else. Enemy soldiers wandered weaponless and dazed. So complete had been the shock and awe of the precision strikes that there was no effective resistance. The fight was over before it began. The line of black armored troops emerged from the smoke and dust on the opposite side of the fire base, unscathed and out of targets. They climbed to the top of the high dune to the rear of the fire base and looked over. In the distance, the land gradually flattened, and they could see the high-rise buildings of Tharsis through the haze, and on all sides soared impossibly high, jagged mountains. They had made it to the top of the plateau. Over the next few hours, they secured the surrounding terrain, eliminating a few stragglers, but finding nothing of any consequence. This sector at least seemed to be clear. Listening on the TAC net, it was apparent that the Red Legion forces had been pushed back all along the front. Intelligence had also confirmed that the Reds had been in the process of withdrawing the bulk of their forces to the outskirts of Tharsis when the firebase had been eliminated. That also explained the presence of the MADV, which had arrived to escort the centaurs back to the relative safety of Tharsis proper. The counterattack that had been halted by the Terra Nova the previous night had been part of a pincer movement involving elements of 4 enemy divisions, totaling around 80,000 men and vehicles, the Terra Nova having stopped one pincer dead in its tracks. The other had penetrated deep into the other flank of the 9 Infantry Corps before being finally cut off and eliminated with great difficulty by supporting divisions of the X-Mechanized Corps. Later in the day, Stalker found himself crouching behind a dune looking at the smoking vista of Tharsis in the distance. The outer suburbs were being pounded by the UEDF, and the horizon was lit by flashes from artillery strikes. As he watched, a rippling roar passing overhead marked the passage of another inbound strike. Stalker knew the city was being rapidly churned into rubble and couldn't help but wonder what the ruined city of Tharsis would have in store for the Terra Nova and for himself. Over the next 12 hours, the 3 UEA Corps conducted mopping-up operations on the plateau and began to rotate worn-out divisions from the line, the Terra Nova amongst them. The Terra Nova's hard-won positions being taken over by the Praetorian Assault Division, another of the UEDF's 10 elite assault divisions. While they waited for retrieval, Stalker and the others lay in shallow foxholes behind the line in case of shelling, their old forward positions now manned by fresh Praetorian troops. As he waited, Stalker listened to the TACnet coming from D's prone form close by. The news was good. UEDF special units had eliminated a number of the lasers and air defenses that had hindered operations up until this point. Enemy artillery was still causing some problems, but it was now only a matter of time until it too was silenced. Tharsis had now been completely enveloped. While in Elysium, guerrilla attacks on convoys and isolated positions had occurred, but were being hunted down ruthlessly. Indeed, Outside of the four main populated regions of Mars, there existed almost no infrastructure or resources to support large enemy forces, and as far as Stalker could tell as a tactic, guerrilla warfare just wasn't effective on a planet like Mars. One continuing thorn in the UEDF side was the remote hammer strike missile launchers that kept popping up along flight paths. The launchers were set to activate at different times, and hence it was almost impossible to declare an area as clear. The only effective way being to sweep the area with ground forces who then encountered mines, remote autocannons, and anti-tank missile launchers, the process proving a slow and sometimes costly exercise. Stalker's listening was interrupted by a flight of Predator gunships sweeping overhead at low level, leaving swirling dust in their wake. Control of the air, it seemed, once again belonged to the UEDF. 2 fresh corps had been deployed to conduct the assault on the city, their reconnaissance elements already probing the outer suburbs. Stalker was completely worn out, every muscle and bone in his body ached, and he sported some impressive bruises. Stalker regarded his heavily damaged EEA suit. He would need to pull another from supply courtesy of the United Earth League taxpayer. He chuckled to himself at that. "What you laughing at?" grumbled D from his hole. "My EEA's got a scratch. I'll need a new one." That brought laughter all around. After a 30-minute ride in a shiny new Rhino 6-wheeled armored personnel carrier, APC, they were picked up by an LTT. As they climbed on, a familiar voice said, "You boys call for taxi?" Stalker turned to see the smirking face of a female LTT's pilot, the call sign on her flight suit reading Lassie. "Just couldn't keep away from him," said Stalker as he climbed aboard. "Oh yeah, the oversized black suit and blank looks do it for me every time." She laughed again. Wow, he thought. It had seemed like years since he had heard a woman laugh. "Nice bird you've got here," he said, looking around at the new LTT and trying not to sound like he was making a double entendre. "Yeah, and I want to keep it that way to... Do you have any idea how much paperwork I had to fill out after what happened to my last one? It's all part of the dangerous lives we lead in service to the greater glory of Earth." Stalker chuckled and strapped in. The flight back to FOB Phoenix proved mercifully uneventful, and once they had landed, he thanked Lassie for the lift and moved off for a well-deserved meal and downtime. As he did so, Stalker threw one last look at the LTT as he left the tarmac. Lassie was outside and was busy walking around her aircraft doing her landing checks. She moved confidently as she inspected all of the points on her checklist. Stalker didn't know much about being a pilot, but he recognized a dedicated professional when he saw one. "I've got to look her up when all this is over and buy her a drink," Stalker declared to himself. The first thing he did when arriving to his assigned billet was to power down his EEA suit, and for the first time in days get out of it for more than a few minutes. It felt like he lived in the thing. Stalker dropped his damaged equipment at the armory and drew up a requisition order from the base's arsenal that he would collect when he got up. Despite the supply problem, Stalker knew that the assault divisions had priority in equipment transport, and he was confident of getting most of the equipment he had requested. Then it was a shower, a hot meal, and lights out. The war could wait a few hours. When he woke up, Stalker felt as stiff as a wooden plank. He looked outside. The sun was setting. Stalker stifled a yawn. "My body clock is stuffed," he said aloud to himself before checking the time. He had slept 6 hours. Not bad, he thought, stretching his aching body, considering there was a war on. Stalker wondered how many people had died while he had slept comfortable and safe on base. Somehow his conscience never truly set him free, so he decided that it couldn't have been too many and quickly moved to busy himself. He stripped and cleaned his impulse rifle, removing the invasive red dust that had worked its way into every part, and if left uncleaned could cause malfunctions. Not an acceptable situation during training, let alone on combat ops. Stalker then made his way past the infirmary to visit Big D and the other wounded. D had his leg wound treated and declared himself fit to fight. The severely wounded were out of danger, and the soldier who had been knocked unconscious during the close quarters fighting had made a full recovery and was being returned to the unit, bringing Epsilon 2-1 back to a total strength of 6, only 50% of normal combat strength. D had received word, however, that they would be temporarily merging with Omega 2-1, another of the 21st Terra Nova's units. Omega-21 had lost their CEO during a sniper attack in Elysium, and now had a fit-for-duty strength of 8 after the battles on the Tharsis Plateau. They would bring the Epsilon up to above full strength, making them once again combat effective. Stalker was glad. He knew many of the other men in 21st, and any Terra Nova soldier was his brother as far as he was concerned. Stalker also knew the Omega men would be eager to avenge the loss of their CEO, and he would be proud to help them with that goal. Leaving the infirmary, Stalker made his way to the armory to collect his requested loadout. A new EEA suit tailored to his measurements waited for him, as well as a new tactical sight for his rifle, as his current one had been damaged by shrapnel. Also waiting were some frag and electro flashbang grenades, and something he had wanted before deploying to the surface, but had been unable to get: 2 magazines of 50mm heat grenades, heat standing for high explosive anti-tank. The special-purpose heat grenades were fired from the impulse rifles under barrel M503 pump-action grenade launcher. They had a slightly longer range and flatter trajectory than the standard 50mm frag rounds, and used a shaped charge warhead to produce a narrow beam of superheated metal which melted through armor before directing the weapon's explosive force inside a penetrated vehicle or structure. They were very useful against light armor and gave an operator some capability against the threat of striders and mechs in the absence of anything heavier. Stalker also grabbed 2 slim tube-shaped single-launch armor-piercing, or SLAP, anti-tank rockets, sometimes called rocket-propelled grenades, or RPGs for short. They were a lightweight, one-shot, disposable anti-tank weapon and packed more of a punch with a longer range than the rifle-fired M503 50mm grenades, but were less powerful than a heavy missile like the Cobra he had used to destroy the Red Legion bunker. Leaving the armory, now bristling with weapons and ammunition, Stalker went next to the base's comm hub. The comm hub was a place where he could hook into the military network, or MILNET, and download all the information and news that his level of security clearance would allow. After satisfying a bored-looking pair of guards of his identification, Stalker plugged a cable from one of the hub's servers into his arm socket, and after a moment, the computer verified his ID and suit security codes. Once verified, the hub automatically uploaded to his suit all the intelligence and campaign information that was permitted by Stalker's Veritas-level security clearance. Satisfied, Stalker went back to his billet to review the information, the news proving a mixed bunch. The 3rd Assault Corps, fresh into the war zone, with the elite Praetorian and Excalibur assault divisions, had pushed the Red Legion forces, now identified as the 5th and 6th Red Guard Corps, back into Tharsis proper. The battle had quickly descended into bitter street-by-street fighting, with the city being churned up by artillery and now CS, close air support, fire. The UEDF's key objective was the atmospheric converters and the rest of the terraforming facility, and the Red Legion knew it. The Reds concentrating what was left of their forces to hold the vital approaches to the main complexes. With the second wave of UEDF forces now all due to be relieved, and the bulk of the UEA still deploying or busy securing outlying sectors, it was likely that the Terra Nova would again be called upon. As Stalker looked over the latest loss reports, he wondered if any of them would make it back unscathed by the end. Other reports had now declared Elysium and its surrounding region secure. Stalker, for one, still had his doubts. More disturbingly numerous mass graves have been discovered on the outskirts of Elysium Prime, no doubt belonging to victims of the religious madness that gripped the city. There were also reports from frontline units of Striders being sighted in and around the terraforming facility, and that got Stalker's attention. Striders acted as advanced recon elements, combining heavy firepower with superb mobility, but with relatively light armor compared to mechs or the massive Goliaths. They were lethal against most infantry, being able to deliver a large amount of firepower on target in a very short period of time before using their superior mobility to withdraw and rearm. Indeed, it was their limited ammunition supply that was probably a Strider's biggest weakness. 6 hours later, the call Stalker had been expecting came. The Praetorians needed relieving, and the commander of the Terra Nova had volunteered the division for the job. The Terra Nova would not let their brothers in the Praetorians down. The frontage in the Praetorians' area of operations, AO, was quite narrow, and even with their reduced numbers, the Terra Nova CO was confident that they could handle it. "We go where the man says we go," was D's reaction to the news. They were committing the bulk of the Terra Nova's reorganized infantry companies, which minus Kia and WI were at about 2/3 of normal strength. They would be further reinforced by the addition of the recently deployed 8th Regiment with its Strider recon elements, with further firepower being provided by Devastator tanks of the UEA's 239th Independent Tank Brigade.